What's going on, guys? My name is Arrow, and in today's video I'm showcasing the best build I have ever made for less than 20 divines. You're going to want to see this one. Alright, so there are a lot of moving parts in this build. If you want to play this, make sure that you watch the entire video. But while the mechanics are complex, the build is not. It is a power siphon locust miner that relies on left click to detonate your mines and right click to throw them. We have more mine throwing speed than I've ever had on a build before, and it is an absolute dream to play with. Let's start with the most important interaction, and that is power siphon and fury valve. A number of gems were changed this league, and the wording was modified to go from fires additional projectiles to fires a number of projectiles. The key difference here is how that interacts with fury valve. Before, if you put a fury valve on a skill that fired some number of projectiles, it would fire one projectile and then split off of the target that you hit into that number of additional projectiles. However, there are a number of skills in the game, things like Spark and Power Siphon, that have projectiles that are now built into the gem. They are not additional, therefore they are not fired as additional projectiles off of the splits. What this means is that you will fire the regular 8 projectiles that Power Siphon has, auto-targeting, and then when it hits those targets, the interaction with Fury Valve then splits to a number of targets based on additional projectiles. As a Deadeye, we get 2 additional, and the Fury Valve gives us 2 more. So Power Siphon fires projectiles at 8 targets, and each target that it hits, it will split off to 4 enemies, which then can all chain. Then we add in Locust Mine. Locust Mine throws a minimum of 3 mines, and I'm fairly certain that the fires a projectile at up to 8 targets overrides the downside in Locust Mine that says supported skills fire 30% less projectiles. I can't really tell if it's doing it or not in game because it fires so many projectiles and they're so fast that I actually can't see if it's firing the 8 that I have or 5 or 6. All I know is that when I throw 3 mines on the ground and click, the entire screen is covered. So that's the first downside of Locust Mine. The second downside is that the mines target your feet. They aim at wherever you're standing, which means you effectively have to stand on top of enemies. However, Power Siphon has auto-targeting, and it overrides the downside of Locust Mines. So now the only downside left is that you can't throw mines basically at your own feet and target them because there's a minimum distance between you and the mines in order to get them to detonate. However, with as much mine throwing speed that we have, as long as you throw them far enough out in front of you, they'll go off before you get to them. So as you run through a map, you right click and you hold down your left click and your mines detonate out in front of you. And you barely notice the downside. It can get a little clunky on bosses if you have poor positioning, but aside from that, the downsides of Locust Mine are almost entirely negated by Power Siphon. So with the changes this league to Power Siphon, the downside now is that Power Siphon's single target isn't very good. However, throwing 3 mines at a time and having all of those mines be able to auto-target a single target means our damage goes significantly higher than you'd be able to get by casting it yourself. Power Siphon eliminates the downsides of Locust Mine, and Locust Mines eliminates the downsides of Power Siphon. It's a match made in heaven. I cannot oversell this build enough. For 20 div, you can take on anything that isn't an Uber. You probably could do Ubers too, but I don't do Ubers myself. I easily killed the Feared. I've been doing super juiced Legion maps with as much Wildwood juice as I can get, and I very rarely have a rare slow me down. There are a lot of mandatory items in this build to truly get it functioning, but none of them are very expensive. I wouldn't recommend that you league start the build this way because some of those uniques are going to be very cheap on league start. However, once you get a little bit of currency, you can get this build running for very cheap. So the next interaction I want to talk about is Graven's Secret. It's not a secret that Ralakesh boots are very powerful this league, as they enable us to use the Maven belts to generate charges for absorption, brutal charges, etc. with those Maven belts, and also get the original charge, whether it's power or frenzy or otherwise. We've never had access to getting both absorption and power charges before, and it made these belts not very strong. However, Ralakesh's Impatience is now less than a divine, and when combined with Graven's Secret, we can get 10 power charges and 10 absorption charges. What are absorption charges? They make it so players recoup 12% of elemental damage taken as energy shield per charge. We have 10 of them, which means we have 120% elemental damage recoup. That's 20 more than a stasis prison. Recoup is one of the most powerful recovery mechanics in the game, but it doesn't show up in PoE as part of your, effective health pool, and I really believe that that's why people don't use it as much in their builds. So you can look at the numbers in PoE all you want, but once you get this build into the field and start playing with it, it's going to feel far tankier than any of the numbers will show in PoE. So Ralakesh keeps us at max charges, which means we also get endurance charges, and then Graven Secret allows us to generate power charges, which we do with Power Siphon very easily, so we're always at max, and turn those into absorption charges. Every hit we take is going to give us recoup because we convert some of our physical damage over to elemental. Now, physical damage is still a technical weakness of this build because we only convert about 35%. I take it back, we have 45% of phys taken as because of our lethal pride. But that means that 35% is going to give us 120% recoup. So we're getting approximately half of every physical hit recouped and over 100% of every elemental hit recouped. One of the reasons that a lot of ES recovery is important is because our chest, the Replica Covenant, has an energy shield cost associated with it. It's a massive amount of flat damage, but at the same time requires us to solve ES recovery. Now, your recoup is going to be a good source of recovery when you're getting hit, but not always are you going to be getting hit and healing up to full. So we're using the Sorrow of the Divine Flask, which gives you Zealot's Oath during effect, so our life regen is converted over to ES regen, and also makes it so our life flask, which is a very, very big life flask, applies to our energy shield as well. Sorrow of the Divine also gives 40% damage and Consecrated Ground. This is a flask that I've never had a good reason to use before, but in this build, it's ultra powerful. You're basically always capped out on your ES. The downside of the Sorrow of the Divine is it makes it so our regen for our life is now applying to our energy shield, which is usually a downside for a mine build, but we are using Macadamites, which give us leech from our mines. So the last core item that I'm going to talk about is the Malachai's Loop. This makes it so we get 2 additional power charges, which also applies to our absorption charges and gives us a bunch of spell damage. There's a wand mastery that allows us to convert that spell damage over to attack damage. The only downside of the shield now is that it shocks you when you get to maximum power charges. I'm not 100% sure how that functions with the Ralakesh boots, but we are shock immune at max power charges because of the charge mastery. We are always counted as at maximum power charges because we have the Ralakesh boots, so we are always shock immune. So that's it for the core of the build. That's how it functions. It feels unbelievable to play. It is some of the best clear I've ever had on a build that can also do the feared. And especially in a league like this, where you're going to encounter shaper level mobs in your maps, it's important to have really high single target on your mapping build. So I cannot recommend this build enough. It's very important that if you do play this, you make sure that you get all of the recommended uniques, or else things might not function exactly as I have advertised, but I really can't oversell this one enough. This build is phenomenal. So let's dive into the gear and the gems and the flasks and things and talk about all of these specific interactions, how to craft stuff, etc., and get you playing as soon as possible. Okay, so here we have our level 97 character. It was trivial to level up, even doing super juiced maps on this character. I don't think I died a single time from 96 to 97. Now, every once in a while with this league mechanic, you are going to get one shot, provided that you are not building the tankiest character. There are just going to be things that get you from time to time, assuming you're playing in softcore and you're not going for every single form of defense. One line of defense that I would like to work into this build is better crit immunity, because there's so much crit with the league mechanic that you can take some massive, massive hits. Oh, Derp Broke Boy has died at position 1 on the ladder and was sent to the void. RIP, Broke Boy. All right, let's get out of global before something bad happens. So we're going to talk about all the different items, and we'll try to keep this as brief as possible while explaining everything that's important, because there are a lot of important interactions here. So let's actually start with these exploding Spectres that you see here in the background. This is some tech that I found from an Alley video, and actually the key part of that video was actually a comment that she had left on it saying if you run 2 of these Spectres, you can have full uptime of your aura. So let's talk about it. We have Hatred, Raised Spectre, and Guardian's Blessing linked here. The way this works generally is you have Guardian's Blessing linked to a minion, and then you link an aura to that minion. And when you activate the aura, the minions will provide you that aura. However, they will take damage over time. So there is a Spectre called the Perfect Dark Marionette, which respawns when it dies. It takes about a half a second to respawn. So let's shut this off for a second so they stop exploding. You get 2 of these, and all you need to do is make sure that one of them is dying before the other, and that happens pretty naturally in maps. and you will have full uptime of your aura. Now you'll see these two have slightly different amounts of HP, and this one comes back before this one dies, therefore it's full uptime of the aura. Now in maps, every once in a while, these two are going to get one shot, they're going to die at the same time, and they're going to come back. You're going to have to redo your hatred. I'd say this happens once every map or two. I find it very easy to upkeep, especially on a build like this that doesn't have that many buttons to press. I've got my left and right click, I've got my movement, and then I've got my focus, and that's it. So keeping up the aura is very easy. So what you can do to keep them up is when you're in a map and you see that they're very close together like this, and you want one of them to survive longer than the other to kind of get their HP pools further apart, you can use a flask like this that grants life recovery to minions, and then when one dies, you press it, you heal the other one, and now their life pools are farther apart. So you can kind of manipulate how much HP they have, and while you're fighting in maps, they're just going to take different amounts of damage, so it's actually trivial to keep them up. I didn't even really have a problem doing invitations with these. They don't die very often. I also have them linked to meat shield. They take less damage, which means they take less damage from the damage over time, but also means that they live longer when they are summoned. So this 4 link gives us pretty much full uptime of an additional aura, and I had extra gems on this build, so might as well get an extra 30% more damage. So let's talk about the gear. We're going to start with the opal wand that I have. This is trash. It's actually not what you want. I bought this base and I hadn't really made a plan yet for how I was going to craft the wand, and I ended up spending a bunch of currency to make a very poor wand. And I thought about it afterwards and came up with a much better way to make a wand. I just never replaced it. So let's jump in and take a look at the wand and talk about how we make it. So you want to buy a fractured opal wand, or there's a couple of other wands that you can buy. Crit chance and attack speeds per second actually doesn't matter. We are completely overcapped on crit by 1,000,000, and the attacks per second doesn't affect the mines. So both of these are actually dead on any wand that you get. The most important thing is the implicit. We care about flat damage, and I want more cold damage so I can freeze enemies, which this build does pretty well. So we have an opal for the big flat cold, and then I got fractured lightning on it. You can also get fractured cold. Just the highest amount of flat damage that you can get is what you want. And then you're going to use an essence to get the other type. So I used fractured lightning, which means I'm using a deafening essence of hatred. And what you want to do is you want to use that until you get tier 1 or tier 2 critical strike multiplier. On average, getting tier 2, I have this all plugged in already into Craft of Exile. It is 40 essences on average to hit that tier 2. Now, unfortunately, these essences are pretty expensive right now. Apparently not a lot of people are doing essence farming, but still, it won't take too long to hit this. And what you want to do is annul off any other mods that you have, which means you may have to do this a few times, but this is definitely the best way to craft this item. So you annul everything off. You have cold, you have your flat cold, your flat lightning, and your critical strike multiplier. That means you have 3 mods left. So you can multi-mod on attacks with this weapon penetrate Elirez and double damage while focused. We're already using focus in our helmet, but if you don't want to use focus, you can craft on regular double damage. However, I find focus to be a really nice way to cast a bunch of spells and our curses on the tankier enemies. So very easy. You're basically targeting 1 mod and then annul and then multi-mod. It's super easy. Because I'm probably going to be moving on to another build at this point because I'm very excited about my new builds. I'm not going to make this myself, but it's super easy, and you'll spend way less than I spent crafting my worse wand. So as you can see, I have my wand in here with the random Exalt Slam of 32 Chaos dot multi and the fizz damage. If you make the cheaper version, it's 12.3% more damage in my build as is. So that's the wand. Here's your helmet. The way that you want to craft this is you want to get an elevated fizz taken as cold from Redeemer, or you can get, I think, elevated fizz taken as fire or lightning from the other ones, as long as it's not Warlord. And then you want to get Warlord on a power charge, and then you want to get Warlord so you can get a +1 power charge and Awaken Orb those together. Power charges can be pretty annoying to hit, so be ready to spend 600 to 1,000 alterations, or you can just buy one. They're usually like a divine or something like that. But you want to end up on a Blizzard Crown, and you're going to Awakener Orb those 2 prefixes together, giving you 2 prefixes and then probably 2 more mods or 3 more mods aside from that. I didn't even notice I was getting trades. I was so locked in. Boop. let's shut off this hatred so you guys don't have to listen to them explode. I didn't have my headphones on and forgot about it. I hope that wasn't too annoying. So once you do that, you're going to have probably filled prefixes, which is unfortunate. I hit tier 7 mana, which is not great. But then assuming you have an open suffix, you can lock the prefixes and use a Veiled Chaos Orb. At this point, you're looking for the trigger mod or maybe some fire and chaos, just some resistances because you're going to need them. I happened to hit the trigger mod and I also filled my suffixes, but accuracy and fire res are both pretty good. So I thought, all right, let's just call it a day. We're done there. The reason that you want the trigger mod on your helmet is so that once every 10 seconds, you can press your focus and cast all of the spells in your helmet. We will talk about the spells in there, but it is really, really convenient. It makes it so this build has way fewer button presses. And I like it way more than like an Arcanist brand setup. The only downside to focus is that it does have a cooldown of 7.5 seconds, which means if you cast it and say you're fighting Cirrus or something and you're too far away and it doesn't hit him, you now have 7.5 seconds of fighting the boss where you don't have your debuffs on them and your curses, etc. So that can be a little bit annoying. I've missed from time to time, but it is important to be relatively close when you cast your focus. The Fury Valve, I was able to get one with an additional curse for 2 divines. They're not going to all be 2 divines, especially when this video comes out. Now, the additional curse is not necessary. And I say this for a very good reason. This is not just me saying, oh, don't worry about it and hand waving it away. The additional curse that we're using is Frostbite. Frostbite makes it so cursed enemies have 36 to cold res, which means it lowers their cold resistance, which makes this elemental mastery almost useless on enemies that have Frostbite on them. So your single target damage isn't really improved by adding this Frostbite by very much. I think Frostbite is a 15% or 14% increase in damage over just using this mastery. So normally a Frostbite curse might be 30-35% more damage. Well, now it's about 15% more because of this additional curse here. You might be better off getting something like Grace Aura Effect or Resistances or whatever you need. But if the curse isn't available, don't worry about it too much. It's only about 15% more damage. On the Malachi's Loop, this is a very cheap shield. I was able to buy one with a perfect fizz damage taken as cold roll. I imagine these will go up a little bit in price after this video comes out, but you don't need the fizz taken as cold. You can get fire or lightning or chaos if your chaos res capped, which I am. You can also get one that has 2 on it to get the number even higher, but those are going to be super expensive. Oh, I just realized this doesn't have quality on it. I'm a bozo. And you also don't need to get a perfect 8% roll. If these get expensive, just get a 6 or a 7. The star of the show when it comes to our added cold damage is Replica Covenant. The amount of added flat cold you get is like twice a level 5 awakened added cold. It's just a massive amount. This also gives us a big energy shield pool to help us get this number bigger, but it also gives us the base ES cost equal to mana cost. So our Power Siphon does cost 26 ES for us to throw this, but that's easily covered by the Star of the Divine as well as our recoup and our recharge. We also have Ghost Dance to help keep our ES at max. Talk about the boots next. Rallakesh's Impatience. You're probably going to want to get these with like +1 endurance charge for kind of the end game if you can afford it. It's just going to be a little bit more fizz reduction, but these are definitely mandatory because they make it so our Raven's Secret belt actually functions. Without these, the belt doesn't work. And also you'll have the downside of the Malachi's Loop as well. So you got to have, really you have to have all the uniques in this build to make this work. However, none of them are super expensive. Fury Valve is 1C without a curse on it. Malachi's Loop is, I think I paid 30C for the corruption. These gloves, I paid 40C with the corruption. Graven Secret, I paid 30C with the corruption. So none of these are very expensive. If you can get good corruptions for 30 or 40C, you know they're pretty common. So gotta have Rallakesh. Makes it so we always have power, frenzy, and endurance. And that makes our charge mines even better because we are always at max throwing speed. Charge mines gives us throwing speed per frenzy charge. We have 6 total frenzy charges, and that leads to a hideout throwing speed that looks like this. As you can see up here, we went up to 18 just about instantly. Do it one more time just to give you an idea of how quick it is. It really is phenomenal. I'm currently actually using Swift Assembly. I'm just testing this, and I don't think it's necessary. You're going to get more damage from awakened elemental damage with attacks, and that's what I recommend. That's what's in the PoB. But just so you know, I have Swift Assembly in here just to test for now. So next, we'll talk about Graven Secret. This gives us +1 power charge, it gives us a bunch of energy shield, and it gives us max absorption charges. Phenomenal belt, mandatory, gotta have it. We have Machina Mitts, which give us reduced recovery rate of life and ES, which is bad, but then increased recovery rate of life and ES per power charge. Because we have 10, that is a net of 29% increased recovery rate of life and ES. Those are phenomenal numbers. That 29% applies to our recoup, it applies to our leech, our regen, and our recharge for our ES. These are phenomenal gloves for us. Get a frenzy charge on them if you can. You can also go for something like life energy shield, but I definitely recommend the frenzy charge. The rings I have on here are absolutely giga. I spent, I think, 2 divines on this one and 3 divines on this one. They're some of the most expensive parts of the build, and it's because we want to get a lot of resistance here. Now, you could spend a little bit less and not have the elemental damage with attacks that I got on this one. But basically what you're looking to do in these 2 slots is cap your resist and your chaos resist. You're going to have to spend a little bit of currency to get really good ones. You might have to sacrifice a little bit of life if you don't have the currency to get something really good. And these rings can be kind of tough to craft. So I definitely recommend trying to buy them if you can. And also getting resistance catalysts makes this way easier. I'm a bit overcapped on a couple of the resists, but I don't have a problem with that because of the altars. You definitely want to be overcapped, but I also have my chaos res at 74%. The reason that chaos res is important is because things like, you know, chaos, like poison, things like desecrated ground, they're going to go through your ES, and that recoup that is so much of our survivability is not getting applied to that damage. So you don't want to be taking massive chaos damage on this build because we only have 3,600 life. So you definitely want to get your chaos res capped. If you can't do that for some reason, you can take the ES mastery that says 30% of chaos damage does not bypass the energy shield, and that will make you a fair bit tankier. So basically on these rings, a best in slot ring is going to be 3 good resist suffixes, a resist implicit, whether that's chaos or elemental, and then your prefixes. Best in slot is going to be life and minus mana cost. You only need that on 1 ring, and then either ES or LE damage with attacks. I have my power siphon costing 6 mana at the moment, and when I'm throwing my mines as fast as I can, you can see my mana is pinned. It's totally fine. We have a decent bit of mana regen in this character, so that we just kind of take by accident. So it's more than enough to recover the 6 mana per throw. Okay, so that is it for the gear. Let's talk about the flasks. Briefly, we discussed the Sorrow of the Divine. Life recovery applies to ES and Zealot's Oath during effect. This lasts forever. It's almost 14 seconds at 20 quality. It gives us Consecrated Ground, which is super nice. Zealot's Oath makes it so our 500 life regen then applies to our ES regen, and that really helps with keeping this ES topped off, as well as our life flask, which here is giga, 2800 over 2.1 seconds, applies to our energy shield as well. So that's basically the entirety of our ES pool per second when this flask is up. The reason I have the life recovery to minions on this, I actually have an almost perfect roll. The reason I have this is because I was running just regular Spectres before. I had the perfect Warlord and the perfect Forest Warrior, but I was really just finding that they were dying in really juiced maps, and I'm really pushing the maps. The only thing I don't do is Delhi right now, but you know, maxed out legions, as many wisps as I can get, fully juiced altars with double negatives, and they were dying every once in a while, and it just was starting to get annoying. I didn't like buying them. It was, you know, it became a cost of the build. So once I found out about this this new Spectre tech that's going to let you have hatred up full time, I decided, all right, let's just do that instead. And the reason that I kept it is because I didn't really have a suffix modifier that I thought I needed, and also I use this suffix modifier to help me split up their life better, so they stay alive at different amount. So they die at different times, but you really don't need the suffix on this. You can just let them take damage. We have a Taste of Hate here. Just get a 15% for taken as. The physical as extra mod is not very important for most of you, but because I have a huge amount of physical damage on this, because I hit tier 2 percent, that actually matters a little bit for me, but don't worry about the physical as extra cold too much. We have our movement speed flask here with movement speed, and then evasion and evasion. Ooh, fun pay calm divine TYT. Rip, fun pay. Get out of there. All right, let's talk about the gems. So in our weapon here, we have a 3-link, cast when damage taken, Immortal Call. This was a lot stronger when I was running the Perfect Warlord, which was giving me the endurance charges that I could expend. I don't know that I can expend endurance charges without generating them because of Rally Caches just says we count as having them. I don't know exactly how that functions, but I'm pretty sure that you can generate endurance charges to expend even while you're wearing these boots. So if you have a way to get endurance charges, it'll still make your Immortal Call better, but we don't have really any other, like Steel Skin is just okay. I don't really like using it. So you can kind of do whatever you want with the cast when damage taken setup. We also have a Frost Bomb on here. This applies a cold exposure to enemies and also gives reduced life regen rate. Mobs these days have so much regen. They have Leech, they're Soul Eater, and they're just recovering all of their life as you try to kill them. So having something like Frost Bomb in a build is really nice. In the helmet, this is our focus setup. So once every 7.5 seconds, we can trigger this focus. It casts a Sniper's Mark, which should have quality, a Frostbite, a Cold Snap, and Bone Chill. This Cold Snap is going to apply the Bone Chill to enemies to make them take more cold damage. And the reason I chose Cold Snap is because you get 20% more effective chill by base quality. I don't know exactly how much chill effect I'm getting from this, but it's a nice free thing to be able to just auto cast. The way focus works is you can have as many links in here as you can afford, and then when you press it, it casts them all. So it casts the Sniper's Mark, Frostbite, etc. In our shield, we have the Grace and Skitterbot setup, as well as Flame Dash. I should also have quality in this. We use the Flame Dash just to traverse over ledges because Shield Charge is our main movement skill. We fly with Shield Charge. Down here we have Hatred and then the Guardian's Blessing setup to go along with it. So Ray Spectre, Guardian's Blessing, Hatred, and Meat Shield support. I recommend using a 4-link, but you can drop the Meat Shield. It's still doable without it. In our gloves, we have Shield Charge linked to faster attacks. I originally had an enhance in here to make detonate mines better, as well as our shield charge faster, but I ultimately got rid of that because I had extra mana that I didn't know what to do with, and I thought might as well just get some more regen, which then will apply to our ES while we have our flask up. Why are we using a detonate mines gem? Detonate mines at 20 quality gives you 20% increased detonation speed. Detonation speed is really important on a build that can throw mines as fast as we do. What ends up happening is there are times where you are throwing them faster than they blow up. So getting a detonate mines, and honestly, finding something to drop in this build might be a good idea to get an enhance on this to give us even more. And also, I think I recommend taking this point with 20% increased detonation speed on the tree. Devastating Devices is not very good because we don't need the power charge generation or the crit chance, so it's just 25 multi. And we have so much multi that that's not even very good. So if you play this build, past 97, that would probably be the next point I recommend taking. And lastly, we have our 6-link, our Power Siphon. I recommend getting a 21, and then you get one additional target. We have a Locust Mine here. Charge Mines gives us throwing speed. It's phenomenal. We're using trap and mine damage. The less mine throwing speed doesn't even matter because we have so much throwing speed. I think we're doing 6 mine throws per second, and there's 3 mines for each. So you're throwing all 18 mines down in less than a second. Power charge on crit. You don't even need quality on this because quality is just more chance to gain power charges, and we don't need that. And then lastly, I have Swift Assembly here. I actually recommend using Awakened Elemental damage with attacks. This is giving you randomly 1 or 2 additional mines, and the mine throwing speed doesn't really help that much, so I don't recommend using this. Awaken Elemental damage with attacks is in the POB. Okay, let's talk about the tree. We are basically taking as many charges as that we can get close to. We have the power and frenzy charges because they're just so strong for us. We want this power charge wheel up here, giving us mana regen to allow us to not need Eldritch Battery. Get a bunch of crit multi from it, some extra damage, and then cannot be shocked while at maximum power charges. We're always there, so we're always shock immune. This wand cluster is absolutely amazing. It also gives us increases and reductions to spell damage apply to attacks. We get spell damage from this node here, we get spell damage from our shield, and I think maybe 1 or 2 other sources. We're grabbing spell suppress. We're not quite spell suppress capped on this build. We're conditionally spell suppress capped. So at full life we are, and I think if we've spell suppressed recently, we're also capped. So Lethal Pride, this is going to be really strong for us. Some great things you can get here are double damage, you can get resist, you can get life, and you can get fizz taken as. I think I have 10% double damage and 10% fizz taken as fire. The more fizz taken as fire you can get, the better. It's way more important than the double damage because we recoup elemental damage taken. Try to get as much as you can. I actually might even think a version of this build that uses lightning coil instead and gets us to 100% fizz taken as would be a giga tank. So I'm taking weapon artistry just because it's got double damage on it. The attack speed and melee strike range don't really help us, but a little bit of block and double damage is worth the 2 points. Same thing here with survivalist. I don't know that I would take these 2 points if it didn't have fizz taken as fire on it, but it definitely helps, as well as you're getting strength from all of these nodes, which means we get to 88 strength here with this setup, and we don't have to get any strength on gear. I originally was running this with an inspired learning here, and I ultimately decided it just wasn't worth the inspired learning. We're using the mark mastery so that marked enemies can't deal crits. This is really nice against bosses, but in maps, it's not giving you that much crit immunity, and I really do think that getting some crit immunity somewhere else would be pretty powerful. I'm not entirely sure where to get it. You can get it as a corruption on the shield, so maybe that's worth looking into. You can get 50% there, but anything you can do to reduce the amount of incoming crit damage is going to be really important. I'm pretty sure my next build is going to be crit immune. So there are a few changes that I made to this build in the PoB. For example, I didn't realize that I was overcapped on accuracy, so you can get like 10% more damage by going this route instead of this route, but you have to manage your own accuracy and make sure that you have enough. I've got a little bit here on the helmet, and I'm taking this wheel down here with the mastery. Maybe you don't need the mastery, maybe you need a little bit more than I have, but definitely got to figure out your own accuracy and adjust the build accordingly. So if you're overcapped, you can go this way, which I ended up being overcapped in my PoB. All right, let's talk about the Ascendancy. I chose Deadeye almost by accident. My original plan was a Trickster, and I think Trickster is probably the move if you want to do more bossing and less mapping, because it's going to be even tankier because you're going to have more energy shield than this version, but it's also going to have more single target damage. Obviously, Tailwind makes you much faster, but the amount of damage that you can get from like the plus frenzies, as well as the more damage per mastery, very strong, very defensive, but it's not going to clear quite as well as the Deadeye version. You can also play this as a Raider. I would say that that's the in-between version of the Deadeye and the Trickster. Deadeye being the most mapping focused and Trickster being the most bossing focused. It's going to give you some nice quality of life. You're going to be able to get fully ailment immune easier. You're going to get a huge chunk of spell suppression to make gearing even simpler. You're going to save some points on the tree. And also all that frenzy charge stuff. It's going to give you some pretty good speed as well as give you some good damage. However, Ricochet and Endless Munitions makes the clear on this build unbelievable. We're getting significantly more projectiles from our Sniper's Mark because of Focal Point. The damage that you get from this is not insane. It's like 12% more damage. But what it really gives you is when you drop your focus on an enemy and hit him with a Sniper's Mark, we are chaining and splitting and hitting everything on the screen. Wind Ward is an option, but I don't really like using this unless I go for spell dodge, because getting hit by a spell counts as being hit. So spell suppression isn't as exciting for Wind Ward. So if you want to play this, block doesn't help, only evasion or dodge works. So I don't recommend Wind Ward unless you want to somehow gear into spell suppression even further and use and go for spell dodge. Far shot, I think, is a bait. I think it's hard to get away from enemies, single target enemies, enough with your mines to make them far away from the mines. So I don't recommend this. Also, Power Siphon doesn't have a huge range. It feels like it has big range because each mine is thrown kind of in a spread pattern, but each individual mine doesn't actually target that far. So I think that Far Shot is probably bait unless you're going for like a return projectile setup, but I don't know if that's worth it. That's something that you can test if you want. You can drop this, whatever you have in your 6th here, whether it's Swift Assembly or Awaken Elemental Damage with attacks, throw a Return Proj in there. I didn't find it was necessary for clear. And you can try out Far Shot if you like. I almost forgot to talk about the Wildwood Ascendancy. Now, of course, we are the Primalist. Unless you're a niche build, you're Primalist. So we've got Might of the Bear here, and then we have 3 charms. I'm using +5 to critical strike multiplier per power charge on all 3 of these. That is 50 multi per, so 150 total critical strike multiplier from these 3. It's fantastic offensive power because we are crit capped. That is not conditional. We are always getting 150 multi. And then after that, you're basically just looking at quality of life upgrades. The ones that I have on here are not mandatory. They're just nice to have. So remove bleeding when you use a flask means means I don't need to worry about having a bleed mod on my life flask here, because pressing any flask will remove a bleed. Then I have global chance to blind enemies on hit here. This is a perfect roll, 15%. You probably don't need to get a perfect roll, but with how many times we are hitting enemies, every throw of a mine is going to hit a single target 3 times, so you're already at 45%. You're pretty much going to have full uptime of blind on any enemy. And then lastly, we have 7% chance to suppress spell damage. These are incredibly expensive for tier 1. The perfect rolled multi and spell suppress. I think this was like 1.5 divines for the 7% roll. If you want to get, 10, 12, 15, you're looking at like 20 divines. So I'd recommend getting spell suppress elsewhere, but the 7% on here wasn't too bad. All right, this was a super long video, but I really can't express enough how important it is that you pay attention to the whole thing if you're going to play this build. There's a lot of moving parts, but when you get it all functioning, it is phenomenal to play. I highly recommend it. If you have any questions about play style, building, if you have any questions about play style, how to throw your mines and stay a little bit away from them, how to craft anything, please stop by my Twitch, twitch.tv/AER0___. We're probably gonna be playing a new build on stream today. Very, very excited. There's so much fun stuff to make this league, so definitely come check out the stream and say hello. So appreciate you all watching. If you want to support me, you can subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment down below. I also have a Patreon, a merch store. It's all in the description below. That's going to be it for me. So as always, take care.